The perfect crime, a crime so flawlessly planned and executed that the criminal leaves behind no evidence, no clues, and no trace of their involvement, thus making it impossible for anyone to catch or even suspect them. Kind of like a scene from Ocean's 11, where the criminal manages to sneak in and out of a heavily guarded vault without triggering alarms, leaving behind no fingerprints, no footprints, and no security camera footage in broad daylight. Well, that, my friend, does not exist, and if it does, it is simply in your dreams. The perfect crime is just a theory. In the real world, no matter how clever or careful a criminal is, something always slips through the cracks. Whether it's a tiny hair, a smudge of a fingerprint, or even a trace of DNA that can be found later, something always gets left behind. Even the best laid plans have flaws, and that's why the perfect crime, while fun to think about, pretty much stays in the realm of movies and TV shows. There is this thing in forensics known as the Locard's exchange principle. The Locard's exchange principle is a key idea in forensic science that says, whenever someone comes into contact with another person, place, or object, they will always leave something behind and take something away. In simple terms, every contact leaves a trace. So, whether it's touching a door handle, sitting on a chair, or even walking through a room, tiny bits of evidence, like hair, skin cells, fingerprints, or fibers get transferred. This principle helps forensic scientists solve crimes by finding and analyzing those traces left at the crime scene. Even if a criminal tries to be careful, they can't avoid leaving some kind of evidence behind. Think of it like this. If you're playing in the sand, no matter how hard you try, you'll always take some sand with you, and you'll leave some footprints behind. Locard's principle works the same way in crime investigations. There's always an exchange of material, whether it's visible or microscopic. Let us take a look into a couple of cases that were almost too perfect. Nobody thought that the perpetrator would ever be caught. Ted Kaczynski, the Unbomber, one of the most fascinating cases where a criminal was caught, not through traditional forensic evidence like DNA or fingerprints, but because of his writing style. Ted Kaczynski, who was a former math professor and recluse, and carried out a series of bombings between 1978 and 1995, targeting universities, airlines, and individuals involved in modern technology. His goal was to draw attention to the dangers of technological advancements, and he believed society should return to a simpler, more nature-based way of living. For nearly 20 years, Kaczynski eluded the FBI, killing 3 people and injuring 23 others. Ted Kaczynski was a twisted genius who was almost the perfect anonymous killer. He built untraceable bombs and delivered them to random targets, leaving false clues that not even the best FBI investigators could debunk. Until 1995. Being so confident in his skills, the Unabomber sent the FBI a 35,000-word essay claiming to explain his motives and views of the ills of modern society. After much debate about the wisdom of giving in to terrorists, FBI Director Louis Freeh and Attorney General Janet Reno approved the task force's recommendation to publish the essay in hopes that a reader could identify the author, and that was how he was caught. Kaczynski's writing style was his undoing. Ted Kaczynski had a very distinct way of writing. He used unique phrasing, words like cool-headed logician, and phrases such as, "You can't eat your cake and have it too," an uncommon reversal of the more typical phrase, "You can't have your cake and eat it too." When the manifesto was published in the Washington Post, Kaczynski's brother, David, and his wife immediately recognized the writing style. They had seen similar phrases and ideas in letters from Ted over the years. David brought his suspicions to the FBI, and this led to Kaczynski's eventual capture. So, homework time, let me know what the exact trace was. It was not like he came in contact with anyone. Hint, I just told you the answer. To add another example, let us talk about Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious and infamous serial killers, active in the 1970s. Bundy was praised for being intelligent, but even his intelligence couldn't save him. If you are not aware with Ted Bundy's crimes, well, he was an infamous American serial killer, active in the 1970s, like I said, known for abducting, assaulting, and murdering young women across several states in the US. His charm and intelligence allowed him to evade capture for years, and he committed many of his crimes without leaving obvious signs of evidence. Bundy was so calculated that many saw him as a potential perpetrator of the perfect crime, but then again, he wasn't that perfect, as what led to his capture was a bite mark. Yes, a bite mark. One of the most critical pieces of evidence that led to Bundy's conviction came from a bite mark left on one of his victims, Lisa Levy, during his final killing spree at Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house in 1978. Bundy, despite his attempts to avoid leaving evidence, made physical contact with Levy during the attack. This resulted in him biting her, which left a distinctive bite mark on her body. According to Locard's exchange principle, this was an unavoidable trace that linked him to the crime. Forensic odontologists, who are dentists specializing in criminal cases, compared the bite mark to impressions taken of Bundy's teeth and found a match. The irregular alignment of his teeth left an unmistakable imprint, and this evidence was crucial in securing his conviction in Florida. During Bundy's attacks, he also left behind hair and fibers on the victims and their surroundings. These microscopic traces, though nearly invisible, played a significant role in building the case against him. For instance, Bundy's car was examined, and hair found in the vehicle matched that of several of his victims. Fibers from the clothing of the victims were discovered on Bundy and his belongings, together with the stolen car where tools like handcuffs, crowbars, and masks linked him to several of the disappearances. The evidence was enough to link him to his crimes. And it has been that way even before modern forensics took off. Every contact leaves a trace. Locard's exchange principle is one of the foundational ideas in forensic science, formulated by Dr Edmund Locard in the early 20th century. Before Locard formalized this principle in the 1910s, forensic science was already evolving, but it wasn't as structured or scientifically advanced. Investigations often relied on witness testimonies, confessions, or circumstantial evidence rather than concrete scientific proof. The concept of trace evidence existed in practice before Locard, but it wasn't fully recognized or systematically applied to crime investigations. Early detectives noticed that criminals left behind clues, whether it was dirt, fibers, or blood, but it wasn't until Locard's time that the idea was explicitly recognized and used as a tool in forensic investigations. However, the concept was always there. In 1827, Maria Martin was murdered by her lover, William Corder. Her body was buried in a barn in Suffolk, England. Corder thought he had committed the perfect crime by concealing the body. However, trace evidence played a critical role in his capture. After Maria went missing, her body was found months later in a shallow grave. The location of the burial was discovered because of information related to soil disturbances and odd behavior noted around the barn. When the body was exhumed and fibers from her clothes and personal items connected Corder to the murder, even though this case took place long before Locard's principle was established, it shows how contact between a criminal and a crime scene left evidence behind that ultimately implicated Corder. It is the same with a case back from 1905, which involved two brothers, Alfred and Albert Stratton, who murdered shopkeepers Thomas and Anne Farrow during a robbery in London. The investigators didn't have DNA or modern tools, but relied on basic forensic techniques that hinted at Locard's principle. At the crime scene, investigators found a bloody fingerprint on the cash box. The fingerprint was identified as Alfred Stratton's, and it was one of the earliest cases in England where fingerprint evidence was used to secure a conviction. Though fingerprint analysis wasn't directly tied to Locard's theory at the time, it follows the same principle that physical contact between a criminal and the crime scene leaves behind a unique trace that can lead to identification. Technological advancements are also taking Locard's principle to the next level. These advances allow investigators to examine old evidence with new tools, uncovering traces of the perpetrator that weren't detectable before. Many cases that once baffled investigators for decades have been solved due to breakthroughs in DNA analysis, forensic genealogy, and other cutting-edge forensic techniques. Example, the Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer terrorized California from the 1970s to 1980s, committing numerous murders, rapes, and burglaries. For decades, the case remained unsolved, and D'Angelo's crimes were considered untouchable. However, in 2018, D'Angelo was arrested after investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to a public genealogy database. They were able to narrow down the suspect through familial matches, eventually identifying D'Angelo as the Golden State Killer. This case marked one of the first high-profile uses of forensic genetic genealogy, sparking a surge of interest in solving other cold cases with this technique. And we will keep seeing this grow, and more cold cases getting solved now with the growing field of AI. For the cases that are yet to be solved, and for some seem like they would never be solved, the concept still applies. Every contact leaves a trace. Perhaps the reasons they were not caught was because technology was limited at that time, or the evidence might have been degraded or contaminated. Because, while Locard's principle holds that trace evidence is always present, forensic databases like CODIS for DNA and AFIS for fingerprints need a reference to match the evidence against. If the perpetrator's DNA or fingerprint isn't in the system, the evidence collected from a crime scene remains a dead end. Well, I hope this video was informative and you found value in it. Otherwise, see you in the next video.